Chapter 13 Memory. What can I do to improve my memory right away? How do I keep a big chunk of information in my memory? How can I easily access this information when I need it? A few years back, I walked into our office early in the morning before anyone else had come in. The phone started ringing, so I went to answer it. Immediately, a woman's effusive voice sang out from the other end, "I love you, I love you, I love you." Trust me that this is not a common response I receive answering a call. "Whoa," I said, "who's this?" "It's Anne. I took your course." She then quickly declared, "I found it." Okay, she had me. "What did you find?" "I don't know what it is, but I've been doing all these exercises you've been teaching, and I've started to remember things, even when I'm not using the strategy and methods. I'm remembering names and conversations." So she hadn't answered that question either. I realized I was going to have to let her tell her story the way she wanted to tell it. Over the next few minutes, I learned that a few years earlier, she'd been given a family heirloom from her grandmother. It was a necklace that had been passed down from generation to generation, and her grandmother skipped over her own daughter and her 3 older sisters to bequeath the necklace to her. Anne was extremely honored to receive this gift and vowed to be careful with it. There was only one problem. She'd been so concerned about keeping the necklace safe that she'd hidden it somewhere she couldn't remember in her house. When she realized she didn't know where the necklace was, she started searching, but to no avail. This led to monumental levels of angst and an enormous amount of guilt compounded by her family. After 3 years, she'd come to the conclusion that she'd either misplaced the heirloom forever or that someone had stolen it. Then, at 2 a.m. the morning of this call, she woke up out of a dead sleep. She went down 2 flights of stairs to her basement, ran over to her boiler, moved behind it, and reached into a crevice there. She pulled out the necklace and nearly died from the relief. "That's an amazing story. Congratulations," I told her. "I'm curious, though. I didn't teach you how to find misplaced items. That's not one of the things we covered in our class." "Yes, but you did something way more valuable. I don't know what it is, but for the past few weeks, I'm just remembering all kinds of things, not just in the present, but stuff I hadn't thought about in years. Jim, thank you for giving me my brain back." What Anne was illustrating through her excitement is something I've been sharing with people for a long time. Yes, your brain is an organ, but it acts like a muscle. And it most significantly resembles a muscle in that it's a use it or lose it device. Our brains stay fit only when we make a concerted effort to keep them fit. If we fail to keep our brains in shape, either through laziness or being overly dependent on technology to do our thinking and remembering for us, or by failing to challenge ourselves with new learnings, it becomes flabby. Think about it this way. If you have your arm in a sling for 6 to 12 months, you don't come away with a stronger arm. In fact, after you take the arm out of the sling, you're likely to have little functioning at all. Your brain is the same way. If you don't exercise it regularly, it might not be at its best when you need it the most. But if you make the effort to keep your brain in top shape, you'll discover that it's always ready to do superhero level work for you, just as it did for this caller. You can always rely on Mom. Memory is arguably the most important part of the learning process. If you cannot remember, then you cannot learn anything. There is no knowledge without memory. But why do most people have less than ideal memory skills? I think it's because of the way we were taught to memorize things, which was usually through rote memorization. To this day, most schools teach students to memorize by repeating a fact or a quote until it is temporarily burned in, even though people tend to forget this information as soon as they no longer need it. And this type of memory rarely leads to mastery of the material being memorized. Your memory is one of your greatest assets. It supports you in every area of your life. I challenge you to do anything without utilizing your memory. If you did not have a memory, life would be extremely challenging to say the least. Imagine waking up each day and forgetting everything you ever knew. You would have to teach yourself how to get out of bed, how to get dressed, how to brush your teeth, how to eat your breakfast, how to drive your car. That would be quite inconvenient. Luckily, you were born with a great memory. You just need to be shown how to use it. Quick start. How would you rate your memory right now? What aspects would you like to improve? Take our memory assessment at limitlessbook.com/resources to understand more. If you're going to perform a major upgrade on your brain, you're going to want to unlimit your memory, as memory is such a fundamental part of most brain function. Since that's the case, let me reassure you with a very important fact. There's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's only a trained memory and an untrained memory. If you have trouble remembering people's names, making presentations without notes, or even finding your car keys in the morning, it's extremely unlikely that this is because you're incapable of doing these things. Instead, you just haven't gotten the training. Joshua 4 is proof positive that memory can be trained. In 2005, Joshua was a journalist who had taken on an assignment of writing about the little-known world of mental athletes. Fascinated by what he saw in elite memorization contests, he wanted to discover more about the participants. To his surprise, he learned that almost every participant he interviewed described themselves as having a poor or average memory before they learned and practiced the principles of memorization. Now they were competing at the highest levels of the contest. It dawned on Four that there were no restrictions to memory and that memory can be trained just like athletic skill. He began to practice what he learned. 1 year later, he returned to the USA Memory Championship, but this time as a competitor. The day of the event, we had lunch together between competitions and marveled at the fact that often what appears to be genius can actually be learned. Later that day, Four placed number 1 and took home the trophy. He went on to write the groundbreaking book, Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything. Why is memory so important if you're going to unlimit yourself? Because your memory serves as the foundation for every action you take now and every one you will take in the future. Imagine what it would be like if your computer had very little storage or had inconsistent access to what it had stored. Most functions would be nearly impossible to perform. You'd start to write an email message, and your computer might or might not have the addressee among your contacts, and might or might not remember how to send the message after you'd written it. And the ones that did perform would take excruciatingly long while your computer figured out how to do it. While I've likened our brains to supercomputers, we all know they're so much more than that. Perhaps the most significant difference is our ability to reason, to consider the facts or the situation in front of us, and to act, innovate, or navigate through circumstances based on those facts and situations. The process of reasoning requires us to shift through rich stores of memories using tools that have been proven useful in the past to make informed and productive decisions. It's impossible to think creatively into the future without a sense of what is known, writes Dr. Eve Marder, professor of neuroscience at Brandeis University. We commonly say that we are looking for interdisciplinary and synthetic thinkers who can make connections between disparate fields and see new paths for discovery. I cannot imagine finding those creative leaders for the future among the legions of students who forget everything they have learned because they can just look it up. How does one know what to look up if one has forgotten so much? Dr. William R. Clem, who we met in Chapter 12, gives us 5 reasons why improving memory is essential. Number 1, memorization is discipline for the mind. Much needed in an age where so many minds are lazy, distracted, have little to think about, or think sloppily, memorization helps train the mind to focus and be industrious. Number 2, no, you can't always Google it. Sometimes you don't have access to the internet, and not everything of importance is on the web, and a great deal of irrelevant trash will accompany any search. Nor is looking up material helpful under such situations as when you learn to use a foreign language, must write or speak extemporaneously, or wish to be an expert. Number 3, memorization creates the repertoire of what we think about. Nobody can think in a vacuum of information. To be an expert in any field requires knowledge that you already have. Number 4, we think with the ideas held in working memory, which can only be accessed at high speed from the brain's stored memory. Understanding is nourished by the information you hold in working memory as you think. Without such knowledge, we have a mind full of mush. And number 5, the exercise of the memory develops learning and memory schema that promote improved ability to learn. The more you remember, the more you can learn. I want to emphasize that last point. It's not accurate that your memory works like a container, a cup, or a hard drive in that once it's full of data, no more can fit. It's more like a muscle in that the more you train it, the stronger it gets and the more you can store. In this chapter, I'm going to discuss some tools and techniques designed to train your memory. You will be applying basic principles of the mind and developing your memory in such a way that will make learning and remembering more natural, easy, and fun. The most fundamental of these, though, is this: always remember Mom, a mnemonic device I created to kick up your memory instantly. M is for motivation. We've discussed this. The simple fact is that we are considerably more likely to remember things that we are motivated to remember. If someone says to you, "Hey, remember our call tomorrow?" you may or may not remember that you've scheduled a call with that person. If instead he says, "Hey, if you remember our call tomorrow, I will give you $5,000. You will definitely remember you've scheduled the call. You are overwhelmingly more likely to remember something when you have a strong motivation to do so. So, if you want to train yourself to have a stronger memory, give yourself a stronger motivation to do so. Remember the power of questions we talked about in the section on motivation. Reasons reap results. So make remembering personal. If you can convince yourself that there's value in retaining a memory, there's a good chance that you will. O is for observation. How often do you forget someone's name as soon as you hear it? The reason is likely that you weren't entirely paying attention when you heard that name. Maybe you were looking around the room to see who else you knew. Maybe you were still thinking about a conversation you'd just had. For whatever reason, you weren't entirely present. Most of the time, when we fail to remember something, the issue isn't retention, but rather attention. If you're serious about boosting your memory, condition yourself to be truly present in any situation where you want to remember something. M is for methods. Over the course of this chapter, I'm going to provide you with a set of tools that you'll be able to use when you want to remember something. Make sure you're always carrying these around in your mental toolbox, and be sure to employ them to the point where they become second nature. The more memorable baker. The chances of remembering something increase dramatically if people can attach a reference point to the thing they are trying to remember. A number of years ago, after a study testing people's ability to put names to faces, researcher Gillian Cohen coined the name of what came to be known as the Baker-Baker paradox. In the study, participants were shown photographs of faces, offered the names and various details about the people in the photographs, and then asked to later recall the names. The study showed that people had far more trouble remembering last names than they did occupations, even when the last name and the occupation was the same word. So, for example, it turned out to be significantly easier for a participant to remember that someone was a baker than their last name was Baker. Let's go back to Joshua 4 in a moment for an explanation. When you hear that the man in the photo is a baker, that fact gets embedded in a whole network of ideas about what it means to be a baker. He cooks bread. He wears a big white hat. He smells good when he comes home from work. The name Baker, on the other hand, is tethered only to a memory of the person's face. That link is tenuous, and should it dissolve, the name will float off irretrievably into the netherworld of lost memories. But when it comes to the man's profession, there are multiple strings to reel the memory back in. Even if you don't at first remember that the man is a baker, perhaps you get some vague sense of breadiness about him, or see some association between his face and a big white hat, or maybe you conjure up a memory of your own neighborhood bakery. There are any number of knots in that tangle of associations that can be traced back to his profession. What the Baker-Baker paradox illustrates for us is that creating associations for ourselves is likely to boost our memories dramatically. The exercises on the following pages are tools along these lines that I have found particularly effective. Recalling a great deal of information. One of the things I do regularly when I'm speaking to large groups is ask audience members to throw out a group of random words, somewhere between 30 and 100, that I will then repeat backward and forward. It never fails to get an odd reaction from the crowd, but that isn't what I'm looking for. Instead, I do this to get across a key point, that everyone has the capacity to do the same thing and more. We've already talked about the importance of memory in performing nearly all brain functions. If you're going to unlimit your brain and therefore unlimit yourself, you need to unlimit your memory. This means training your memory to the point where it can retain a great deal of information and allow you easy access to that information. What I do on stage with the list of 100 words might have the immediate impact of a parlor trick, but how I train myself to do this is through a technique that anyone can use to remember and access lots of information. Maybe in your case, it's the specifications for your entire line of products, or maybe it's a long string of mathematical formulas. Maybe it's the directions to all the stops on your swim practice carpool. Whatever it is, this tool can help. For the sake of this exercise, let's talk about how to memorize a list of words. The technique will be the same regardless, but it'll be easier to explain it to you if we can focus on a particular thing. Below, we have provided you with a list of simple words. Your assignment is to memorize them in the order they are given. Spend no more than 30 seconds looking at the list, then flip the page over, and good luck. I'll read this list to you right now. Fire hydrant, balloon, battery, barrel, board, diamond, night, ox, toothpaste, sign. Now, that was 10 words. What was the method you used to remember this list? Did you repeat the words in your head over and over? For instance, were you saying to yourself, fire hydrant, balloon, battery, fire hydrant, balloon, battery, fire hydrant, balloon, battery, barrel, etc.? Did you find that you needed to repeatedly say the words over and over again until they stayed in your head? Did you try to see the words as pictures in your mind? Most people use one or a combination of the first two methods described. The process of repeatedly saying or writing information down to remember it is called repetition learning, otherwise known as rote learning. You may have used rote learning in the second grade to remember your multiplication tables. You would say to yourself, 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 7, or you may have written it out. 7 times 7 equals 49. 7 times 7 equals 49. 7 times 7 equals 49. And you would continue to fill up your sheet of paper. This is also most likely the method you used in elementary school to learn how to spell. Your teacher may have asked you to spell a word like chair 50 times on a piece of paper. What was happening was your natural learning ability was being stifled. You bored your mind continually with this method until it finally gave up and said, "You win." For the 100th time, Columbus landed in 1492. Just no more of this chanting. Most people find that rote learning to be a very tedious and boring process. It taxes your mind and is extremely ineffective for remembering most things. We know that as much as 85% of the information you take the time to remember in this fashion is lost in only 48 hours. That is why some students find the need to cram, because they know that the material will be lost in a very short period of time. Elementary learning. One of the reasons rote learning is inefficient is because it only involves a small part of your brain. You're using a more analytical part of your brain to process information and store what you need to learn. By implementing rote learning, you only engage part of your mind and an even smaller portion of your potential. In the traditional education system, you probably learn this way in such topics as history. Calvin Coolidge was the 30th President of the United States. Coolidge 30, Coolidge. Chemistry. Glucose C6H12O6. Glucose C6H12O6. Glucose C6H12O6. French. Comment allez-vous means how are you? Comment allez-vous means how are you? Comment allez-vous? How are you? The list goes on and on and on and on. The question you must ask yourself now is the way I learned in elementary school the best method for me to learn today? The answer is most likely no. In school, they taught you 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Too bad spelling wasn't one of them. I always thought the 4th R should have been recall. Your requirements for learning have changed a lot over the years. Repetition learning had some decent results when you were younger, but in today's world, it will leave you drowning in information and mental fatigue. Note, the word rote literally means an unthinking repetition or mechanical memorization. In this section, I'm going to show you the skills to remember more effectively than you ever thought possible. These skills will help you to replace the feelings of hoping you'll remember with a feeling of confidence in knowing that the information you possess will be available whenever you need it. And now, take a minute without looking back at your notes and try to recall the list in order it was presented. Write down as much as you can remember. Take a minute and do this now. How did you do? If you are like most people, you probably were able to retain a few words on the list, and probably not in order. Quick start. Now, let's try something else. Take a minute and stretch. Take a few deep breaths, clear your mind, and relax more with every breath that leaves your body. Just take a moment and relax. When you are done, continue. Now that you are relaxed, I want you to, if it's safe, close your eyes, make sure you are comfortable, and I want you to imagine you're standing next to a giant fire hydrant, the biggest one you've ever seen. Now attach a bunch of balloons on top of that fire hydrant. Notice what color the balloons are. Say out loud what color your balloons are. Say it out loud now. Now, there are so many of these balloons, it takes the fire hydrant out of the ground and it floats up high and high in the sky. Then suddenly, it is hit with a barrage of batteries. Loads of batteries are coming, and they pop the balloon. I want you to look at the batteries. What brand of batteries are they? Say it out loud. And you wonder, where did the batteries come from? The batteries are coming from a gigantic wooden barrel. A gigantic wooden barrel on the ground. There's somebody inside the barrel throwing all of these batteries out. And what's different about the barrel is on the side of the barrel is a gigantic surfboard. A gigantic surfboard on the side of the barrel. And rolling down the board is a large diamond. Not a 1 or 2 carat diamond. It's an 84 carat diamond. A big, brilliant, sparkling stone that's rolling down the board. And then it falls off and hits a knight in shining armor. It hits a knight in shining armor on the head. Imagine that. Imagine the diamond falling and hitting a knight in shining armor on the head. He gets knocked out cold. And what happens is an ox comes to wake him up. Can you imagine that? An ox comes and starts licking him on the head. An ox is doing that. And then afterwards, the ox starts brushing its teeth with toothpaste. Imagine that, toothpaste on the ox. Imagine the toothpaste all over the ox. Notice what brand of toothpaste it is. And when the toothpaste is done, the toothpaste animates and runs into a big neon sign that says, "Congratulations" on the sign. Now, I want you to take a moment with your eyes closed and review this little story. Review this little story in your mind. Close your eyes and start with the fire hydrant. Tied to the fire hydrant was what? And review the story in your mind. Quick start. Now, without referring back, what I want you to do is write down the 10 words. Take a moment on your notepad and write down the 10 words in order. As you may be aware, we turn your list into a story. And as you go through the story in your mind, you likely recall many of the words. Let's check your answers right now. Let's do it together. The first word, fire hydrant. Then, balloon. After balloons, batteries. After batteries, barrel. Good, very good. After that, board. After board, diamond. After diamond, knight. Very good. After knight, ox. After ox, what happened with the ox? Toothpaste. And then finally, sign. Very good. So check your answers and write down the number you got correct. Fire hydrant, balloon, batteries, barrel, board, diamond, knight, ox, toothpaste, sign. That's very impressive. I have a question for you. Can you do it backwards? Can you go through this list backwards? Let's do it together. What was the last one? Sign. Before sign, toothpaste. Before toothpaste, say it out loud. This is the active part. Ox. Before ox. Knight. Before knight. Diamond. Before diamond. Board. Barrel. Batteries. Balloon. And finally, fire hydrant. How did you perform the second time? If you are like most students, you are able to recall more of the words than you did previously. The amazing thing is that once you start training your memory in this way, you can use this tool to memorize vast amount of information. I've used this technique to help actors learn all their lines in a script, to help students memorize things like the periodic table, and to help salespeople speak about a product with a level of granularity that made it seem as though they'd engineered the item themselves. Remember that there's no such thing as a good or bad memory, only a trained memory or an untrained memory. Employing this tool regularly will give you the kind of training that you can access in all kinds of situations. We call this story method chain linking because it's like links you're connecting in a chain. When you could see it and you could hear it and you make it funny in a way that's memorable, you're not going to forget it. Your active focus in memory. This is a very important concept. Most people approach learning as a passive activity. They encounter information in books, notes, or lectures as if the material is absorbed. Great, but if it is not, they feel there's nothing they can do. This passive outlook is the hit or miss approach. It holds that if the information sticks, it's more a result of luck and repetition than focus and skill. By taking a more active approach to learning, you will have greater results and the satisfaction that comes from involvement and personal awareness. Learning passively is weak. Active learning is strong. Now, when we're talking about memory, there are 4 elements you want to consider to making something unforgettable. The first is visualization. Your visual memory is very powerful. By seeing the pictures a story paints and not just the words that represent those pictures, you create a stronger means by which to remember. Thinking is done through the use of pictures. Do this now. Think of your bed. What did you visualize? Maybe you saw a queen-size mattress with a wooden headboard, navy blue sheets, and giant pillows. You probably did not see the words navy blue sheets and giant pillows in your mind. You saw pictures of them. This is how your mind thinks. If you doubt this, then ask yourself, do you frequently find yourself dreaming in words? Probably not. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. The second element is association. This is the key to memory and all learning. In order to learn any new piece of information, it must be associated with something you already know. This is worth repeating. To remember any new piece of information, you must associate it with something you already know. You have done this all your life. You just might not have been aware of it. Here's a simple test. What comes to your mind when you think of a cherry? Perhaps red, sweet, fruit, pie, round, seeds, etc. These are words and pictures that you have learned to link to a cherry. You associated something you knew to something you did not know. You use association to ride a bike, eat your food, have a conversation, and to learn to do anything. In the same way, by making a story out of the words on your list, you associated them consciously for easier recall. Your mind is constantly making countless associations every minute, most of them without your conscious awareness. This is how you learn. Do you have a song that reminds you of a special person? That memory is an association. Do you have a smell that reminds you of a time in your childhood? That memory is an association. Why not use this information and make associations consciously to learn more effectively? Another element to your memory is emotion. We've discussed that. Adding emotion makes something more memorable. Information by itself is forgettable, but information combined with emotion becomes a long-term memory. When we add emotions to something, we make it adventurous, we make it action-filled, we make it humorous, and we're much more likely to remember it. As you go through and think about that story, it had action. You had a fire hydrant, then you had all these balloons, and then you had the action of batteries popping the balloon. And if any of this made you smile, it evoked an emotion, which helped you to remember it. And finally, another element that's important to your memory is location. We are really good at remembering places because as hunter-gatherers, we didn't need to remember numbers and words, but we needed to remember where things were. We needed to know where the clean water was, where the fertile soil was, where the food was. If you can associate something with a place, you're more likely to remember it. These are some of the keys to having a great memory. The rest of this chapter will be dedicated to showing you specific techniques and applications you can use in different situations. If you did not have much luck with your memory story, don't worry. This is understandable. You may just need a little practice. Most people have not used their imaginations since they were children. You may want to review the story a few times as it will be a good workout for your creative mind. You can do this now. Do you still remember the words? You should truly be amazed. For most people, using rote methods, it takes anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes to memorize this list, and with only very temporary results. However, you'll find that this story, which took you no more than a couple of minutes to learn, will be available for you to recall days or even weeks from now without reviewing it, maybe not even once. This is the power of working smart and not hard. This is the power of your imagination. This is the power of your mind. Let's try it again. A quick memory exercise. I want you to ask a friend to give you a list of 10 random words. Or you can make a list yourself. To make this as random as possible, grab the nearest piece of printed media available to you, whether it's a book, a newspaper, a magazine, or a flyer from your local supermarket. Use the first substantive words in the first 10 paragraphs you see. In other words, don't use things like I, the, when, etc. Making sure not to use any word more than once. Write these down. Now, flip over the paper you wrote these words on and try to write the list again, in order. Check what you wrote against the original list. How did you do? You probably didn't remember all 10, but you probably didn't forget all 10 either. That's instructive because genius leaves clues, by which I mean that your innate intelligence teaches you about your intelligence. There was a method that allowed you to memorize what you did, and you can access that to move to the next step. Tell yourself out loud which of the words you remembered. and why you think you remembered those words. Doing so will help you to understand how you memorize things. For example, there's a good chance that you remembered the first word and the last word. This is the common phenomenon we discussed back in Chapter 4, known as primacy and recency, where people tend to remember the first thing as well as the most recent thing they heard in any given situation. What other words did you remember? Do these words have anything in common, such as did they all start with the same letter, or they're all action words? What does this tell you? Were the other words you memorized organized in any way? Did they evoke any kind of emotion in you? Was there something unique about any of the words you remembered? What you've likely learned by this point is that the words you were able to remember on your first pass had certain qualities about them. The words you didn't remember failed to have any quality that resonated with you. So let's create a process where every word has a memorable quality. First, tell yourself a story using these 10 words, moving from one word to the next. You're not trying to win a literacy competition with this story, and it doesn't matter if the story makes sense. What's important is that you provide some kind of imaginative detail for all the words on your list. For example, if one of your words is outside, imagine you're in a vast field and that you link your words in the story in the order in which they appear on your list by creating an image for each. Remember, the more emotional and exaggerated they are, the better you will recall. Second, on a separate piece of paper, write down the list again, using the story you created to remind you of the words and of the order in which they appeared. How did you do this time? In all likelihood, you did better, though there may be a chance you still didn't get all of them. And finally, write down the list again, not looking at any of the previous versions of the list you created, but this time, write it down backwards. You'll need to access the story you invented in a different way in order to do this, but this is really going to help lock these words down for you. At this point, you've probably memorized most, if not all, the words on your list. At the same time, you're probably wondering how this is going to help you remember all the details in a presentation you're giving.